Hey there. So, a while ago, I went on a church trip called Christian Awakening, which was a retreat run by upperclassmen for underclassmen. And if you are in any way connected with my church and you haven't gone on CA, please just stop watching this video right now. It's the only time I'm going to ask people not to watch one of my videos. Please go. Just bye. So, I'm assuming if you're still here, either you've been on CA before or you aren't from my church, which is statistically more likely. So, CA involves all of the leaders, including the upperclassmen who are running it, giving speeches. So I thought that I would read my speech from CA. I'm going to change a little bit of stuff, because obviously I'm not going to read names. So, huzzah. Hey there! Welcome to CA. I'm excited to be giving the first speech, which is on evidence for God. I'm really glad to be giving this talk, because CA is a retreat about discovering, deepening, and declaring our faith. Examining the evidence for God has helped me deepen my faith. Before I talk about evidence, though, I want to talk about doubt. A lot of Christians have this idea that doubt is the enemy of faith. They say that to be a real Christian, one must have a faith that is never questioned, but I disagree. In ethics class at my school, my teacher told us that doubts are important because they show you care enough about your faith to ask questions. We all at the retreat got our journals earlier. One of the things therefore is to write down the head, heart, and hands of each speech. The head is some big idea to think about, and the head of this speech is that no matter what evidence you find for God, and no matter how certain you are that God exists, doubts are okay, and a good thing. In fact, it makes sense that we doubt God. The heart part of each speech is the scripture references, and I'm at my first one. Job 11:7 asks, "Can you discover the depths of God? Can you discover the limits of the Almighty?" These questions are rhetorical. No one can discover God's nature. All we know about him is what he chooses to tell us, which is like a scribble in comparison to a sunset. It's natural to doubt that a being as magnificent, immense, and indescribable as God could exist, because we can't conceive of such a being. We must take God's existence ultimately on faith. So why, then, is this speech called Evidence for God? Philosophers question everything and ultimately have concluded that I can only prove that I exist, and barely. To say that God exists takes faith, but so does saying that God doesn't. So what do we do? Is the whole retreat cancelled because Azaria can't even make it past the semantics of the first speech? The problem is with our understanding of evidence. We've been taught in our science classes that science as a field works by using evidence to form assumptions, but that's not really true. Whenever you do an experiment in physics that relies on gravity, you're not expected to reprove that gravity works. We assume that gravity is an unchanging constant, because we have no reason not to. We proved it once, after all. But what about the assumption that dark matter exists? Something that the laws of Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein require in order to be correct. Margot Brouwer, a Dutch university student, is studying whether that assumption is accurate or not. So here's the deal. Science is based off assumptions, which lead us to evidence. Evidence either confirms or combats the assumption, but the assumption comes first. So it is with faith. Once we assume there is a God, we can find all sorts of evidence for his existence. There are plenty of great books on the subject. I'd be happy to give you a list, and I'm sure our youth pastor would too, and you could find even more online. But what I'm more interested in is talking about anecdotal evidence. I want to talk about how God has made himself evident to me in my life. After all, 1 Peter 3:15 says, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." As much as the intellectual faith I have comes from books, the hope I have comes from personal experience. In case you're unaware, I'm non-binary, which means that I'm not a guy or a girl. I also go to a private school that is so conservative that last CA we nicknamed it the Pit, a translation of the Hebrew word for hell. I'm quite excited to graduate, as it's not exactly easy being there while being a member of the queer community. Yet it's not all awful there. Not everyone is bigoted. I am reminded of God's love when, in the midst of a day full of stress and hatred, I have a conversation with one of the few people at my school who I'm out to, someone who doesn't understand my pain, but wants to try. This empathy, something I never expected to find but encountered anyway, is clear evidence for God to me. I am filled with God's peace when I have way too much homework, but the weather is lovely and I open my windows and just breathe. I send up what someone once called an arrow prayer, asking for strength in the moment, and suddenly find the workload isn't less, but my stress is. I am filled with a joy that cannot be of this world when I am on a church trip, whether a retreat like CA or fall retreat, or a conference trip in the summer, or a mission trip. And I am living in intentional community with believers. We are not perfect, and God does not expect us to be, but we are growing more like him, and it delights him. I see God in the faces of my friends as they break character in our school's play because something somebody did was simply too funny, and I know that God is the author of humor. I see God in the tulips that sit on my desk at home, in the way that all the gradients we paint or create on computers have lines, but his fade perfectly smoothly from one color to the next. I see God in the urgent care doctor who does not know about my genetic disease but is willing to learn, and I know that God is the originator of our compassion for each other and the one who has perfect compassion. Whenever I write a new song and learn a new chord on the ukulele for it, I recognize that God is the creator of all knowledge and that he gave us both our desire to learn and our desire to create. I see God in the fact that there is a college where I can study what I feel him calling me to do while also living authentically as who he made me to be, and that it has the best 10th health service for students of all colleges. I don't have to hide. I don't have to worry about being sick somewhere that isn't equipped to care for me, and I can study what he wants me to be. None of this is evidence for God, nor would any of this be stuff you would find in the books I can tell you about. But there is no such thing as evidence-based worldviews. Everything relies on faith to some degree. Christianity makes the most sense, I believe. I'm sure plenty of people here on this retreat believe that too. In light of that belief, all of these things I've mentioned make that belief stronger. Finally, move on to the hands part of the speech. This is sort of the takeaway action part. At some point this weekend, I want you to spend 5 minutes thinking about your own personal anecdotal evidence for God. How has he made himself apparent in your life? I want you to write down your thoughts in your journals. You never know when, in a period of doubt, you may want to come back to your list. It may bolster your faith in a way you never thought of before. Just because the Apostles' Creed doesn't mention the scent of freshly baked muffins or the comfort of a familiar embrace doesn't mean those can't be critical to your faith. Thanks for listening. And I highly encourage everyone to do that. If you are a Christian, think of things to support your faith. How has God spoken to you? And if you're not a Christian, why not? I hope you have a great day.